You're listening to the Adoption and Fostering Podcast.
Hi Phil, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
And I've known you for about 3 years, and we met, didn't we, at Greenbelt?
We did, yes.
I think you had our eyes met across the
exhibition space.
The exhibition space, and we've kind of kept in touch ever since then, haven't we? So you tell me who you are, what you do.
So I'm Phil Green, and I'm the Chief Executive of Home for Good.
And what do Home for Good do?
So Home for Good exists to raise awareness of the need for homes for vulnerable children in the UK. We primarily work within the Christian church.
Mm-hmm.
So we are raising awareness, encouraging people to consider fostering or adopting, and then equipping church communities to do a better job at supporting families that do step forward.
So that's a really clear statement of purpose, and you've been now going for 3 years. How's it going? Because you've got Adoption Sunday coming up on what the date is it?
The 5th of November, yeah. A date that you should be able to remember.
I can remember the 5th of November. Don't know why. Anyway, so it's Adoption Sunday. But you've been running for 3 years now. How's it going?
So, I think we always said that the 3-year mark could be really significant for us, because if you speak to a lot of social workers, they will say that for a lot of people, it takes them 3 years to go from the point of thinking about fostering or adopting to actually doing it. And so we always kind of said that we really hoped that as we reached our 3rd birthday, there would be a real peak of the number of stories we're hearing of people fostering or adopting, right, and citing Home for Good as being part of the inspiration for that journey. And we're experiencing
Is that happening?
That. Yeah. So it's really hard for us to know exactly how many people are fostered or adopted because of us, because we're not a fostering adoption agency, so they are going to their local authority or a fostering agency or an adoption agency of their choice. But actually, just the number of stories we're hearing now of people who say, "Yeah, I'd never thought about adopting, and then I heard." I was inspired through something Home for Good did, or an Adoption Sunday 3 years ago, and now I've got 2 siblings just moving in with us.
Right.
So it's those stories that we're hearing more and more now, which are really encouraging.
Well, I mean, that is really encouraging. And I guess that's all aligned quite clearly with the government's agenda to increase adoptions and the constant narrative, which is we need more foster carers. So, I mean, I know that the adopters coming forward is on the decline, and that's a predicted decline. But is that something that you're aware of? Is that something... I mean, what are people saying? Because after 3 years, are people saying, oh, not another Adoption Sunday? Didn't we do this last year? The year before?
That's a really, really good question. So, yeah, there are some church leaders that we speak to, and they say, oh, no, we did Adoption Sunday last year. We don't have to do this again for another 10 years. And you're like, no, you're kind of missing the point of what we're saying here. Like, actually, we are trying to get churches to put fostering and adoption on their agenda. And this is way more than about one Sunday a year. This is about actually making sure that foster carers and adoptive families within a church context feel supported by their church.
Yeah.
And we've heard horror stories. So we have heard so many sad stories of adoptive families that have left their local church because they were just not understood by their local church, that their children's behaviours were not understood. We've had adopters who have been challenged by, well, your child has been with you 3 years now, surely you would have fixed all their problems by now. And we've heard it all, and that's partly why we exist, to try and ensure that churches better understand the needs of foster carers and adopters. So just saying that this is about one Sunday that you do every 10 years is clearly not where we're at. This isn't about one Sunday a year. This is about helping churches embed this into their day-to-day life.
Their culture.
And within that, we have heard fantastic stories.
Yeah.
So we have been piloting a training course over the last... earlier this year we piloted it, and it was for church children's leaders and youth leaders, recognising that as a charity we hope that there will be an increased number of looked after and adopted children in churches across the country.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure our church are prepared for this. And we heard a story a couple of months ago now from an adopted mum who had stopped going to church with her adopted daughter, I think it was, because the church children's workers were just not catering for her needs. But since doing the training, they made a couple of small changes, and actually now she's loving being part of the church's children's groups.
That's really positive, because I often think that as Christians we equate our children's behaviour very clearly to the, dare I say, spirituality of the parents. good children, spiritual parents.
Yeah.
And that is a really complex narrative if your child is a child who's experienced trauma, loss, separation, and time is not a great healer, and but we prayed for them, so they must be fixed. I guess you're a very good apologist for Home for Good, and I don't want to be critical of Home for Good because I've got no experience to be critical of, because my church life is all a bit bonkers. But do you think that is a message? That message around, I guess I'm struggling because I've got lots of questions and I don't want to kind of project them on you because you're not responsible for God or the wider church in general. I'm not going to put that all at your door and beat you with it. But
thank you.
Because I have to say that when I said, will you speak to me, you said, yeah, but be nice to me. And I said, okay, I'll be nice. Because I've perhaps been a critical voice I don't think of myself as critical. I think of myself as I ask questions.
We like people who ask questions.
Right. Awkward pause in the conversation. No, it's all amicable. Do you think that churches are getting it? Do you think that communities of believers are getting it? Do you think they should? What is it? Well, that's not even a question. That's just something to think about. What are the criticisms that are being levelled at you? I don't know what they are. What are people saying? Oh, I'm for flipping good.
It's a fair question. It's a fair question. And I think kind of on this space at the moment is one we're really wrestling with. Like, what as an organisation should we be doing to make sure the people we are encouraging to step up to foster or adopt get the support they need? At the moment, our focus is very much as an organisation on equipping the church to better offer the support that they can.
Great.
But also making sure churches don't overstep, recognising that churches are great places to offer practical support, but you don't want churches dabbling in support.
Therapeutic.
Exactly.
Or pseudo-spiritual therapeutic support, which can be quite creepy.
Exactly. So we want to make sure we're really clear for churches what they should be doing to support families that foster and adopt, and what actually you need to leave to the professionals.
Because I guess technically you could argue that you've got an ethical responsibility, and I'm really conscious of the language of the Bible is immersed, it's dripping with this adoption narrative, isn't it? Everybody in the Bible turns out to be adopted, or knows someone who's adopted, a bit like real life, really.
Yeah.
And so
that is.
It is. So I could get up on Sunday in any church in the country and I could preach a really cracking 3-point sermon and weave adoption into a spiritual message, and everyone would go, boom, yeah, we get it. So So there's an element of predisposition or vulnerability, I'm not sure.
So one of the things that I'm really encouraged about when it comes to Home for Good is, some people read the Home for Good book, and that book has inspired a lot of people to foster or adopt.
Yeah.
It's put some people off. Because it's actually opened them up to what fostering or adoption is really about. And they've suddenly realised, this isn't for me now.
So you're not sugarcoating it.
Exactly. And one of the local authorities we work with, they said that, normally only 1 in 10 of our inquiries go through to become a foster carer. And they're saying amongst Home for Good inquiries, it's nearer 1 in 3. And again, one of the reasons they gave for that is actually you're really honest about what fostering is like. So people are less likely to drop out during the assessment and training process because we don't shock them,
and
because they've already heard it, they've already spoken to foster carers.
You've moved them along that sort of continuum.
So and stories like that really encourage me, and I think it gives me confidence that what we're doing as Home for Good does have a sense of integrity about it. And that we are trying to be positive about fostering and adoption. We think that there's a lot of positivity needed across the field, and we want to encourage foster carers and adopters when they're at their wits' ends and stuff. But we never want to sugarcoat it. We never want to underestimate how hard it is.
No, I mean there's an integrity to that, and I don't think you do. I am conscious that with any people who are listening. You talk about, Paul said, we're adopted into God's family, we're all adopted as sons. Jesus was adopted by Joseph and all that kind of stuff. Moses, everybody, all the main players had some connection, it feels like.
But then look at someone like Moses. Look how difficult his life was. Like, he did great stuff, didn't he? But he made one mess up after another, kind of thing. So actually, there is a degree of realism there. Like, that's not adoption through rose-tinted glasses, is it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And even Jesus knocked Joseph back in his box. The story of when Jesus gets lost in the temple, and Mum and Dad disappear, lose him for 3 days, come back, and Joseph goes, "Where the blue blazes have you been?" And Jesus goes, "I've been in my father's house." And to me, that's Jesus going, "Don't you forget that there's more than." Talks of issues of contact and birth family, and is Jesus.
Absolutely.
And you kind of go, "Whoa!" Jesus is saying, "Yes, you're the guy who's been put in charge of me, but actually, there's another guy, there's another dad." I've probably committed a mild heresy in that, but forgive me, Phil. I'm sure there's a reverend in the building. He'll sort me out.
Say straight, but no,
yeah.
I think the point's fair.
Yeah. I also wanted to know about what other are people criticism of Christians being involved? Is there a kind of a social work is historically very humanist, perhaps and my perception before I became involved was it particularly secular and potentially anti-faith, and that's a sweeping generalisation, so it's not fair, but that's perhaps my stereotype.
So, by and large, there's a neutrality or even positivity towards faith across the board. Let me kind of share a few kind of anecdotes here. So we often, don't know if I should say this on a podcast, but I will. We often group kind of local authorities into one of three groups. There are those that are just desperate to find foster carers and adopters. So therefore, they will work with anyone, and that includes the church. So they overlook the fact that we're Christians, like, we're desperate. So if you can help us, we'll work with you. Secondly, there are those that are like, you know what, the support community.
Which is a progressive perspective.
Yeah, so exactly. So the support communities that faith communities offer, that's really significant, and that's a really positive thing.
Yeah.
And some we work with, they go from group 1 to group 2, and that's great. A lot start at group 2 though. But actually we're beginning to see a third group emerge, and that is actually the recognising that faith motivations can also be a really important thing. And that actually people of faith are coming into fostering and adoption with different motivations, and that's not to say their motivation shouldn't be tested and checked and questioned during the assessment process. They absolutely should. But actually, if we're saying that the children waiting to be adopted at the moment are not the children that traditionally potential adopters have gone from, and we've got an increasing number of adopters, not just coming from the faith community, don't get me wrong, but coming from the faith community saying, we want to adopt a child because there's room in our home and there's room in our hearts, and we're willing to take a child with additional needs or whatever it might be, then that shouldn't be overlooked. And I think we are seeing in some places a real warmth towards that.
That reflects the different, I suppose, a society change, but also a change in the nature of children you need adopting, doesn't it? That actually some children don't need a cookie cutter mum and dad Labrador Volvo. They need something different and need people who are experienced and maybe have a couple of kids and have a gap.
Absolutely.
Or perhaps their children have a bit older and moved on, or whatever, for fostering.
Yeah. And that's exactly when we are going to churches, that's what we're trying to do. We are trying to get churches to rethink their understanding of who is your typical foster carer, what is your typical adoptive family look like. And again, hopefully then, that when people inspired by Home for Good do go into the assessment process, they are more aware of the realities of fostering and adoption in this time, in this society. Yeah.
I mean, do you come across people, and this perhaps links back to an earlier thing you said, I'm a naturally reflective person, so I part of our mission as a family, as a couple, was we wanted to adopt. And so fertility was in the mix of that, infertility was in that mix, but it wasn't a big player. And I look back now, and the constant question I have is, did I want to be a saviour? Sometimes, I used to lay awake, when I was a younger man, I used to lay awake at night going, what is my motivation? Is this the right motivation? Do I want to be a father? Do I want to be a carer? Do I want to be a saviour? And I have no idea. I've come to, depending on the weather and what I've had to eat, I come to different conclusions. Now, do you find people kind of want to buy into that saviour narrative? I mean, or is it something that you try and negate against?
Yeah, like I think the motivations for most people coming forward to adopt are ultimately varied.
Yeah.
So I think it's very hard to say.
Who can sift the minds and hearts of
exactly.
people?
So I think, and I think going back to what I said earlier, and that's where we don't want to downplay the importance of the assessment process when it comes to assessing motivations. We know that there will be some Christians who step forward into the adoption process who their motivations, they're not correct, they're not right, they're not suitable, maybe a better word to use than right or correct. They're just not suitable for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. So we don't, and we know that social workers, generally speaking, are very good at their job. We just are really saying, actually, the faith motivation pieces, like, take them seriously, because they could actually be really, really positive and just what you're looking for. Yeah. But clearly, like, you've got to explore the whole saviour piece. Like, what is it going to feel? Yeah, what is it going to be feel like to be raised by someone who's more interested about being your saviour rather than your father or your mother? Like,
that's a tricky question.
Massive questions, isn't it?
And then 2 years down the line, you aren't the saviour. Your child is struggling, and the behaviours that presented at day 1 are still presenting at day 3. Then you're into that issues around people going, "Whoa, yeah. I'm a failure."
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that again, that's where just the wanting to be appropriately but brutally honest with people who are stepping forward to foster or adopt, making sure they're speaking to adoptive parents who are 10 years down the line, so that they are really getting the picture of how things could turn out. But getting varied stories, so getting the good stories as well as the challenging stories. Because you've got to acknowledge the good and the bad, and actually it's very rarely linear, is it? It's actually good and bad all mixed in together.
It's a blur, isn't it? Yeah, and that's really interesting, because I keep one eye on the world, and I see that I kind of see this American phenomenon around faith and adoption and international adoption and domestic adoption in the US, and I think just through social media you see some of that sort of seeping into the UK, and some of that, I'll be honest, unnerves me. The American evangelical, and obviously you came from the Evangelical Alliance, and I don't want to get you into trouble, but what are your perspectives on that? Because I think that feels very different, the American model. Now, do they have a Home for Good, or do they have lots of little Home for Goods?
There's various organisations across the States, some of which are doing fairly similar things to Home for Good, focusing on domestic adoption and fostering. International adoption is still a massive kind of part of the scene in the States. But I think just the church culture in the UK and the States is just so vastly different. So I just think actually a lot of the issues that you're talking about we see in pockets in the UK, but I just don't think it is such a widespread cultural phenomenon within churches in the UK. Sometimes I love the kind of what's going on in America. Like, you hear about big mega churches and within a few weeks finding 200 foster carers from within their congregation and solving the city's need, and think, wow, wouldn't it be fantastic if we had stories in the UK doing that? But we're not in the same context. Not least property system, and property is more expensive in the UK. There's less spare bedrooms in the UK, and actually what we're coming up against as Home for Good, as we work with churches and encouraging people to foster adopt, it's very similar to what's going on in the rest of society in terms of spare rooms and employment rates and all of those kind of things. All
cost of living
come into the mix.
Well, I mean, that's encouraging, because I think that's probably my reflection, is that we're chalk and cheese. We're two very different countries with a common language. That's about it. Can I draw you onto slippery rocks?
Yes, why not?
No, I just think that in the past we've talked a little bit about the history of the church and how adoptees, historic, people who are maybe my age, older, have looked at older, and the church has kind of had this really interesting history around adoption. the Catholic adoption agencies, Anglican, everyone's had their go. The Pentecostal adoption agencies. Do you feel that you're not responsible for that? Phil Green wasn't.
Thanks.
I'm not putting that on your shoulders at all. But do you think that is a legacy that has an impact on what you do, or is it on your radar, or is it just? It's an impossible question.
No, it's certainly on our radar, and clearly you should always learn from the lessons of the past. However different the scenarios were, you've always got to be learning from the lessons of the past. But adoption in the UK has changed so significantly from how it was just a few decades ago. And I think that change is really significant. So actually, the issues of the past come up far less often than I would expect potentially that they would, because I think people realise that adoption's in a different place, the relationship between the state and adoption is in a different place, and actually churches are in a very different place now as well. And I think over the recent decades, with churches becoming so involved in a whole range of social action, community programmes, they've shown themselves to do things very, very well, to take safeguarding very, very seriously, etc. Exactly.
Into all kinds of areas.
So often when we're going into local authorities having conversations, that's the platform we're stepping onto. We're stepping onto the platform with the food banks, the debt advice centres, the street pastors, all these initiatives that the councils and the police rave about because they're making real difference.
Yeah, really positive stories coming out of a lot of those services. And I guess my journey has always been I adopted, and it opened a world that I wasn't expecting. And that is around social justice, around the needs of young women who have their children taken off them. And it's not fair for me to put this on you because you're set up for a very specific purpose, and I'm kind of going, why aren't you doing this? And why aren't you doing this? And why aren't you doing that? It's not fair on me. But do you see that? Is that sort of, as you have opened this world, have you seen that there's a world before this? You're pulling kids out of the river. Who's pushing them in, or who's letting them fall in?
Absolutely. That is such an important question, and one we're occasionally talking about with church leaders who, in their congregation, have got people who have had birth children removed. So this is very real for them. We work closely with an organisation called Safe Families for Children.
Yep.
So they are the organisation that is working through predominantly church volunteers to work with families at risk of having their children taken into care. And we are delighted that Safe Families for Children exist and are doing such a good job there, because actually it's really important that the church is doing that, because otherwise I think Home for Good's position would be more difficult to hold. Because people, like a number of times I'll ask in a question and answer session, why are you not doing more to stop children being taken into care in the first place? And I can actually just say, we're not, because it'd be inappropriate for us to be doing this and trying to encourage people to adopt at the same time. But Safe Families for Children, they are doing this, and that's fantastic. And you've got to stand alongside them in the work that they're doing, because it's important. So it's great that the church, I suppose, as a whole, is getting really engaged in this whole space. There's still loads more to do. We're scratching the surface.
Yeah, and I guess that is a really key message, that you're not, with the left hand you're helping young mums who are struggling, but with the right hand you're trying to get foster carers and adopters. You think, well, people would really struggle with those two arms offering them help.
And everyone's heart is that Home for Good can cease to exist. But sadly, well, in terms of the finding hope, in terms of the supporting adopters, clearly not. But actually, like however well Safe Families for Children do their job, there are going to be children in the care system in the UK. And for as long as there's children coming into care in the UK, we want to make sure the church is doing its part to find foster carers and adoptive families.
I think we potentially have a church. I think as many churches have a lot to offer, because they're often a really interesting, diverse group of people that can offer lots of different support. But they've often got a doctor and a solicitor churches are full of
absolutely
a real broad section of society.
Yeah, like the number of stories we've got of actually, the doctor in the church suddenly being able to sign a bit of paper that's really significant, and churches are often literally at the centre of their communities, and a lot of people would go to the church building for things because it would be the community centre. I think churches can be the centre of the community and will be there a lot longer. Than a lot of other things that are going on, and so the people will be the same for a lot longer as well. So I think there can be a real sense of continuation there, which can be really, really important.
So I mean, I think the only criticism I've actually overtly heard is around long-term support, which I think you've probably addressed. So I'm not going to address it again. But is that an issue that actually, some families are going to need support for 18 years, 20 years, 25 years, and I've got friends with young adults. Who need
absolutely. So I think I'll say two things on that. So one is that we predominantly work with adoption agencies when it comes to adoption, and the adoption agencies we work with offer post-adoption support for life. Yeah, and that's really, really important for us. So we want to make sure if we're recommending you adopt with someone, we know that their support is good.
You sort of vetted them.
But for us at the moment, we're wrestling with this question right now, is what should Home for Good be doing in terms of long-term adoption support? Yeah. We don't want to be competing with other organisations. We don't want to be getting involved in stuff that's not our expertise. But if there is a need that needs to be met, and that we say, we can find the best people in the country to help fill that gap, and we think the church is a really good arena for that support to be outworked, then we want to step into that space. So that is very much on our agenda at the moment, and over the next year we will be putting more concrete plans in place to what that will or won't look like.
Yeah, I mean, I think just thinking about what we've talked about, I think that it's quite a brave stance for the church to take in the light of history, and not a brave stance is probably wrong, but a kind of quite a there's a lot of criticism that can quite easily be levelled at you. Have you had a lot of criticism? No.
Maybe
it's just the criticism in my head, the voices.
Well, I think it's the bad news stories, and don't get me wrong, there are some serious bad news stories, so we can't ignore them, that they are genuinely bad news stories. But there's also all the good news stories, and there's all the thousands upon thousands of Christians who have been fostering or adopting for years, behind the scenes. No one's really known what they've been doing, but actually they've transformed the lives of thousands and thousands of children. And that's been going on for years, and we want to make sure that continues into the future and increase that number.
And that's a great, what's wrong with that?
And in fact, for us, that's also key now for our Adoption Sunday messaging. That Adoption Sunday isn't just about raising awareness of vulnerable children in care and encouraging people to step up to foster or adopt. It's actually an opportunity for churches to stand with foster carers and adoptive families in their church and say, well done, we want to stand with you, we want to pray with you, we want to support you. Because we often find, I've shared the kind of more horrific stories of some adopters have experienced within their church, but actually often it's just that feeling of isolation. It's that our family life is different, we don't quite fit. So you know what, people just stop inviting us for stuff, we stop going for stuff, and before long we find ourselves as on the fringes of church life. Nothing malicious went on, but that's how it is. But actually we just hope, we've seen it in a number of occasions now, that Adoption Sunday can just be an opportunity for church to kind of press the reset button, to say we recognise that we haven't done well by you, and we haven't asked you as foster carers or adoptive families, how can we support you? And Adoption Sunday is just an opportunity for a church to acknowledge their past failings and to kind of say, from now on we want to stand with you. So that for me is really, really significant.
No, I think that it is, because I once heard a statistic that up to about a third of people who adopt and foster have a faith, and whether that could mean anything, but obviously that some of them will be Christian. Any closing statements? How can people get in touch? I mean, it's probably this is going to go out too late for Adoption Sunday, but if people want to access resources and stuff, where do they go?
Head to our website, homeforgood.org.uk, and there you can find out how to get in contact with us personally, and we'd love to hear from you. And if you want to engage with our work in any way, you'll find out a few ideas on the website, but call our phone line to chat to someone. And if you are a Christian foster care or adopter and you don't think Home for Good is getting it right, please tell us. We want to hear voices like that, and we are really, really keen to
What if you're not a Christian and you're looking for a good support network?
Well, you're welcome to phone us, and we'll see what we can do.
We'll find you some friends.
And a lot of the support groups that are facilitated by Home for Good champions, like they're not Christian support groups. They are for a kind of a whole range of people. Again, it goes to that idea that churches are often community centres, and they're running toddler groups and things. So there's all kinds of activities that are going on. So although Home for Good are unashamedly kind of targeting the church, as it were, we want to be a voice within the church community. We hope that what we're doing will benefit a lot wider group of people, including foster carers and adoptive families of all faith and none.
Well, that's a great way to end, isn't it? Thank you very much, Phil, for your time. Look after yourself.
Thank you.
Cheers.